This may be controversial, but let me give you the best advice I can after my first year of watch collecting. Fail. Fail quickly, fail thoughtfully, and you know what? Maybe even fail on purpose. As a new watch collector just starting out, I think there's a very real pressure that we feel to get this watch collecting thing right and to get it right fast. When you first get into watches, everything feels important. Every purchase feels like it should be meaningful or it should have a story attached to it, that it needs to be a piece that we can hand down to the next generation. And all those things are really, really cool. But here's the problem. When you're starting out on this journey, you don't actually know what you like yet. You think you do, but you don't. And the only way to find out what you like is by wearing watches over periods of time, not just watching videos about them and obsessing over them in your head. When I started, I thought my first year was going to be about building up my collection. In reality, it's been far more about building taste. I thought I was a field watch guy. Then I thought I was a chronograph guy. Then I convinced myself that I needed a dive watch. What I didn't realize was that every watch feels completely different on my wrist than they did in my head. And you learn more about what you like wearing on a random Tuesday than from reading specs or scrolling wrist shots. Actual preferences, actual taste is formed by experiencing watches in the metal on your wrist over a long period of time. One of the fastest ways to learn what you love and what you don't is to own a lot of different watches. And before you think that I'm delusional, I'm very aware that watches cost an absurd amount of money. And owning a bunch of watches isn't always a possibility. And it certainly is easier said than done. So if that's you, I see you. Stick in there. I actually think this lesson can apply regardless of the price point that's accessible to you. But you need to get wrist time with a bunch of different watches, different sizes, different styles, different brands, different price points. And I think the most effective way to learn is to actually own watches. And especially earlier on, the smartest way to do that is to make sure that we buy at a level where selling never feels painful. This way you can keep experimenting and refining your taste. So here are some practical rules that I used throughout the past year. I think they could be good for you to consider as well. And the first one is quite simply, set a hard ceiling for your first year. Not a ceiling for what you can afford, but a ceiling for what you can afford to lose. For me, I chose not to buy any watches unless I thought I could break even if the watch didn't knock my socks off. Because of that, I decided to stick to watches that had a strong track record in the secondary market. That way, if it didn't work out for me, I knew that there were others out there that would want it. Next for me, I didn't want to spend a bunch of money on hype pieces. Given my rule set, it was too big of a risk for me to jump in on the hype. There have been a lot of really, really cool watches released over the past year. But for me, I prefer to let the dust settle a little on the hype before considering jumping in on a watch. And then lastly, buy gray market and used whenever possible. The best way to make sure you never find yourself underwater on a watch is to become an expert at navigating the gray market and the secondary market. Know where you should buy and where you shouldn't. Know which dealers are trustworthy and which aren't. There's a whole world out there, but there are deals to be had for those that can navigate it. So get comfortable in the gray market, get comfortable in the secondary market. And I think that's been a huge help for me. And remember, and this is really important. So remember that it's not about making money selling watches. This is about reducing the stress of becoming a watch collector, freeing you up to make mistakes and learn about who you are as a person and learn about your preferences while reducing the financial risk associated with a really expensive hobby like watch collecting. And believe me, I know selling your first watch feels a lot like quitting. At least it did for me. But it's not. It's information. I've sold 2 watches in the first year of collecting. Both were killer watches, but for me, they had a fatal flaw. One of those watches was an Omega Speedmaster Date. I had a gray dial, really beautiful gray dial, 40 millimeters, is from the late 90s. This watch solidified my love for both chronographs and the Speedmaster, but the size just didn't quite work for me. It felt smaller than I wanted it to be on the wrist, and at the same time, it was like chunkier. So I sold it. Because I bought it right, it's sold fast and actually was able to make some money that I ended up putting towards the Speedmaster Professional that I have in my collection today. But for me, it's a success when I buy a watch, I find that it's not for me, and I move on. It would be far more painful for me to hold on to a watch that doesn't fit who I am or who I want to be because I made a mistake and was too afraid to take the financial hit. My first year of collecting hasn't been about building a forever collection, although I fully expect to have some of these pieces in my collection for the long haul. It's been far more about developing my tastes and my preferences and learning who I want to be as a collector. So fail fast, fail thoughtfully, and let your collection evolve honestly. Because taste isn't discovered by getting it right. It's formed by getting it wrong enough times to grow. So let me know what you think in the comment section. I love reading your comments. I try to respond to every one of them. I would love to hear your experience. Like, what was the first watch that you thought you'd love, but you didn't? You know, and if you're further along down the road, the collecting journey, like, what failure did you learn the most from? Drop it in the comments, like, subscribe. Appreciate you guys. We'll catch you next time.